I was looking at an artist's work yesterday, and there was this particular piece that kind of caught my attention. And I should also note this is an artist whose work I've followed for a very long time and who I think has been very influential to me and whose work I really respect and is also very widely known and respected and celebrated. And I'm not going to say who because I don't want what I'm saying to be taken as critical, and it's not important, the specifics here. But there was a component to this particular piece I was looking at that just felt really undercooked. And in a way that I think was more so than a lot of other pieces by this artist, but I do see this as a commonality in their work. And it got me kind of thinking about how that is a part of a recognizable style of an artist. That we tend to think of style as being the intentional choices we make. And perhaps this is an intentional choice being made by the artist as well. But I see it as a deficiency in a work which is very accomplished in a lot of other ways. But there's this one area that to me I kind of connect with as could have been done much better. There's so many different elements that go into making, especially for a realist painter. There's so many things starting from the very abstract, basic concept and message and intent, emotional intentions of the piece, what the artist wants for people to receive from the work when they look at it, and scaling all the way down into the much more technical stuff about render, composition, color theory, just all the different ways that it's this vast array of skills, and a lot of them are linked and related to each other. But definitely every artist is going to have strengths and weaknesses, and some areas that they have more natural aptitude towards, and other areas that they have to work harder to really kind of bring that skill level up, and some areas where they prioritize that's either more interesting or they just feel is more important. And then other areas that maybe are a little bit of a blind spot and we don't necessarily think of them when we're doing a piece as particularly important, or we just don't notice maybe. I mean, oftentimes blind spots can be like this where we don't even notice that we're undervaluing something that to a lot of other people might be kind of obvious. Which also, there's a lot of maybe assumptions that I make when I'm looking at this piece and that we all make when we look at art. And the biggest assumption is probably that our values are the same as everyone else's, and particularly the same as the artist. So if I look at a painting and I feel like the rendering is too much one or the other, either too tight and cold or too sloppy and messy, that suggests that that's of the same importance to the other, to the person who did the work, and that this is that my taste is the same as their taste. And that's absolutely not the case. There's definitely going to be, and I've had this experience where there is an artist whose work was really beloved by a lot of people, and I would just look at it and be like, I don't understand it from a render perspective. I don't get what people like about this. And weirdly, just one day I looked at this artist's work and was like, oh wow, this is really good. This is really fascinating, inspiring. The work had not changed, but I had changed. My opinions and taste and just what was interesting to me had changed. So going back to this original piece that I was looking at, I felt like there was a component to it that for me was something that I value and that's something that I think is really important. As an illustrator, I recognize that a lot of what I look at in work relates to the kind of work I do. So there's usually a priority put on some type of representational work, that the realism is believable, even if it's highly stylized, that there is an internal coherent logic to everything, and that there is a message and a story to take away from it, whether that is literal or whether it's more kind of just emotional, that there feels like an intention behind the piece. And when one of those things is missing, even if it's an artist I really like, and even if I really connect with the piece in certain ways, it's gonna stand out to me when something is missing that to me is important in being in the piece. But I recognize that I have struggled with some of these things myself in my own work. And for example, when I was starting out, it was really important to me to get my technical proficiency down and learning how to render, learning all of the important aspects of form, lighting, brushwork, just all the different things that you need to understand in order to create that level of realism in a representational piece was top priority to me. And at that time, I was also much more interested in tight render, highly detailed work. And over time, my taste shifted away from that. And I also began to realize that I was heavily undervaluing the message and emotional component to pieces. And as a result, I look back at some of my early work that other people might really like, and I can recognize that there are parts of some early pieces of mine that I did very well, but that it might be missing that purpose behind it, other than I was just really focused on these kind of surface things, and I wasn't thinking about that message and that kind of stuff. And that became something that I wanted to really kind of work harder on being mindful of, and thinking about how that was going to be an important part of every piece that I did. Even if I'm working for a client where they're dictating to me what the piece is about. And in a lot of ways, that makes it easier to undervalue thinking about message and thinking about emotional resonance and things like that, because that weight is being carried by your client when they're telling you this is what the piece needs to be about. You just need to understand how to solve the problems and implement your craft. You could kind of coast by without thinking about that stuff. But it made me realize it was going to make my work better to think more about that. And it continues to be a thing that I need to intentionally think about and work on. And so I'm not going to talk bad about or say anything critical about any other specific artist. I don't want to be dragging anyone, but I will definitely call out, like, there are things I've recognized in my work over the years, and there's still things about my work that I feel are undercooked. Some people might see as flaws or shortcomings in the work. But ultimately, I am recognizing in these other artists' work that I look at, when there is this consistent, what you might call undervalued or areas that fall short components to their work, that becomes part of that artist's fingerprint. That becomes something that we associate with that artist and recognize. And whether it is a thing that we think is a benefit to the work or a hindrance, it is part of who they are. And whether they are doing it intentionally or unintentionally, it's part of who they are. And so just to get into thinking about style a little bit, which is probably something that I've been wanting to do, actually a whole video or series of videos on the topic, because I think there's a lot of interesting things to think about and say about it. But just in brief, I believe that if you were able to, if it was possible to make a piece of representational artwork that was indistinguishable from reality, something that perfectly depicts the reality of the scene, that would be a piece that is completely absent of style. It's the ways that artwork departs from reality, that makes it unique and recognizable to one artist or another. And that is also inevitable. Just the fact that we're translating real life into a static two-dimensional image through whatever medium it is that we're using, it is inevitable that there's going to be departures from reality. I don't care how good you are. And a lot of that is departures that probably are guided intentionally by the artist. We tend to do things that we feel benefit the piece, that we feel are exciting to look at or interesting to look at, or it could be anything from influenced by your choice of medium. Let's say you work in scratchboard. Just the nature of your medium is already a heavy departure from reality. Let's say you work in a genre or language of visual art that has its own stylistic parameters. For example, anime, where the look of the genre, the language that you're working in, departs from reality in some very specific ways. But even people who work in as realist painters, very naturalistic painters, we're still making choices that are going to be simplifying things, leaving things out, emphasizing things, de-emphasizing things. We're, again, just translating physical dimensional space into a flat image. We're forced to make these choices. But there's a whole range of things that goes into what makes an artist's work recognizable that are not necessarily conscious. And you could think of them as limitations or ways that an artist is, again, you're making choices, prioritizing certain things, and sometimes we have a habit of undervaluing or not prioritizing certain things. And when that is just part of our general personality or part of our general aesthetic, that's part of the style too. What are some of the things? If color theory is something that is of very little importance to an artist, and as a result, there is a consistency in their work where the colors are very bizarre, and the work is otherwise interesting and competently done, but it consistently has this like kind of strange color, or an artist who is colorblind and they have like an actual physical limitation in being able to work with this one component in an image that other people might not have that same limitation. That's going to show up as part of the signature of that artist's style. And that can be seen as a positive or a negative, I suppose, depending on how you feel about that artist's work. If you like the work, that's part of what maybe you like about it. So this has got me just kind of thinking about my own work and how if I can look at the pieces from artists who I really admire, and I can see things that is showing up that to me feels not the way that I would do it, but more than that, it's seeing things that to me look like something that I find important was not important to the artist making this piece. And so therefore, to me, that comes across as a weakness. It might not bother other people. And when it's an artist that I still really like, even though there are certain things that I value high and they might not value so high, it's still a successful piece. And so that's interesting to me. And it makes me think about, in my own work, I recognize there are things that are harder for me, and there are things that come more natural. And it's always struck me as very difficult for an artist to look at their own work and see it the way that other people see it. We're always going to have a somewhat distorted view because, for one thing, we know the whole story of what went into that piece, and we know when we maybe took a shortcut. We know when we were feeling impatient or tired and didn't want to do it on this one particular area as much as we could have. And we also, I think we underappreciate the things that just come natural to us. I've had some pieces that just seem to just happen just flowed right out of me real easy. And I might think of those pieces as maybe I don't value them as much as something that I really had to work for. But other people, I think that when something flows like that, there's an elegance to it that other people are going to be really attracted to. So there's all these different ways I think that our perception of our own work is distorted. And for me, I feel like this has always been something of a challenge for me, is getting into ornamentation and design, not design of the composition. That's something that I think a lot about and I feel is very important, but design of like costuming details and other things that are kind of, that there are a lot of artists I see who, especially working in fantasy art and other kind of genres that are very kind of science fiction, horror, things like that. There are some folks who just get into those details and create these really interesting and unique ornamented environments, costumes, objects. That's always been a struggle for me, and it's something that I have to really work at, and I feel is one of the things in my work that I wish I would push it more than I do, but I really have to it's more effort for me. There's a lot of things in my work that I naturally put a lot of effort into, and it doesn't feel like I'm putting a lot of effort into, but that's one where it feels like work. And as a result, I always feel like I could have done it more. And I look at other people who are really good at doing that, and I wish that I had that ability. But this is like causing me to think about how that is part of what makes my work my work. That is one of the things that's maybe not something that I am totally happy about with my work, but it is important to what maybe my work would be 10 times better if I was better at this. And I continue to try to push myself to improve here. I'm not saying this isn't the old, when somebody gives a criticism and the defense is, well, that's just my style. No, if somebody gives me criticism that the ornamentation is undercooked in my work, my response is probably going to be, yeah, it probably is, and that's something that I want to just keep trying to keep in the front of my mind on the next new piece. And there's one other part of this that I was thinking about, which is that what one person sees as a deficiency, another person can see as a strength. To say, I've been using the word undercooked to represent when one of these many building blocks of a realist painting feels, according to me, like it's maybe not as well thought out or as given as much love as some of the other components. If it's undercooked to me, like maybe I could think of it as like rare and well done. And there are going to be people who like certain parts of a painting more rare and some parts of a painting more well done. It's all definitely a certain amount of personal taste. And just because something is important to me doesn't mean it's universally important. Going back to that artist whose work I felt was very chaotic and sloppy until one day it was really exciting and interesting. And that's a case where maybe I liked my meal well done, and then one day I realized, oh, maybe I like it better when it's a little more rare, and I think that's important to keep in mind also when we're being harsh on ourselves about things in our work. It's so hard to talk about this without sounding like don't try to do better. because I think we should always be trying to do better. I think we should be intentional in whatever we're doing. We should be thinking about these things and aware of what we do. That said, we don't have to take everything as all the way to the top. When I started out learning how to paint and high render and detail was important to me, I pursued that to a point where it became less important to me. And then I was able to make the intentional choice of where do I want to do more render and where do I want to let things be more suggested. So ideally, we would be in control of all of these things. But the reality is there's also going to be blind sides. There's also going to be things that we are not as naturally inclined towards. And so maybe it's a combination of observe these things and strive to get what you want out of it, to understand your own tastes and aesthetic and to pursue that. And also to forgive ourselves for the fact that we're not going to be able to have the same level of proficiency in all the different things that go into this, and that we're always learning and we're always improving. And that's okay. And over time, over the long span, when we have a body of work that represents years and years, at this point for me, it's getting close to 20 years for illustration, and that's enough time, especially if you look at the last 10 of it, where I really had more of an idea of what I wanted to do and who I am. That's enough time to see these commonalities take shape and to see that we are made up not only of the things that come natural to us and that we put a lot of priority on and that we're really good at, but we're also made up of those other parts that maybe we undervalue, maybe we ignore. And we can pay attention to those and work on those, but they are part of who we are. And they are part of what people like about your work. It's actually part of what is completely missing from AI generated images. That's just a random assemblage of everything from everybody. And it has no real point of view, of course, but it also has no consistent shortcoming besides the ability to draw hands. But it's that absence of both the high and the low aspects of an artist's ability that I think, for me anyway, makes it feel dead and cold. And I didn't intend to talk about that at all, but it just came to my mind as connecting with what I'm talking about here. What I really wanted to focus on is just how we look at our own work and to be thinking about this in a way that, on the one hand, we can use it to help guide us and think about if there are parts of our work that we want to pay more attention to, but also to just take comfort in the things that maybe we don't do as well as someone else. They still contribute to who we are and the signature and uniqueness of our work. And that is supremely important now more than ever, to have that identifiable voice and signature and style and all that kind of stuff as part of your work, and to embrace ourselves, warts and all, and just understand that there's a lid for every pot. Whatever one person likes this work for this particular reason, another person dislikes it for the exact same reason. You can't be beating yourself up over if you're not perfect at everything. And when I look at the work of an artist who I really admire and I see something consistently happening in their work that's not how I would do it, or that doesn't align with my own aesthetic, even though everything else I think that they're doing is really interesting, That's okay. And other people are going to see that in my work. And that's okay too, because it's just me. And all we can do, I think the best we can do is try to put out good work, be intentional in what we do, but also just be who we are and learn how to have a comfort in that. So, I don't know, just some thoughts today. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of it, and I'll see you next time.